Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 514th New Social Environment. I'm Nick, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Mungo Thomson and Andrew Woolbright. We're thrilled to welcome the poet Joshua Mehigan here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has undertaken a miraculous journey, bringing together in a single monthly publication art, music, dance, film, theater, and literature, along with thoughtful social and political meditations. As a small nonprofit, we do need your support. Your contribution will directly support our writers, guest artists, production staff, and operations here at the Rail. Please check the chat for more information and links to donate. But now to introduce today's guest and host, the wide-ranging multimedia work of Mungo Thomson approaches mass culture and everyday perceptual experience through a lens of deep time and cosmic scale, implicating the spaces of production and exhibition in ever-widening extrapolations. Recent exhibitions have taken place at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, and his current exhibition, Time Life, is on view at Karma, New York through April 16. Our host today, artist, curator, and critic Andrew Woolbright, is an MFA graduate from RISD in painting and is the founder and director of the gallery Below Grand, located on the Lower East Side of New York. He will be curating shows at the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center in Hesse-Flatau in the summer of 2022, and currently teaches at the School of Visual Arts and SUNY New Paltz, and is a 2021-2022 resident at the Sharp Valentis Studio program. So with that, Andrew, passing the mic over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Fong. Thank you, Carolyn, and the Brooklyn Rail staff for hosting this event, making it possible. And thank you for all the work that goes into every single one of these. And I'm really excited today to get into what is one of the best shows I think I've seen in the last year or two. It's a really incredible experience, and I highly recommend you all heading over to Karma's, which one is it, 22 East 2nd Street location. And we're going to do our best today to talk about this show, but I can't stress it enough. You have to see this one in person. This translates somewhat well, somewhat okay. I mean, it's incredible work, but this is an experience that really needs to be seen. The gallery has been transformed into a theater. The sound, the way you interact with it, and the images, they're completely different than seeing it just on the screen. So just wanted to give that explainer at the top of this, that we're talking about something on a scale, but try to imagine the sound just flooding into all of your senses and experiences. But I think it's probably best to start with the trailer, if we're ready to pull that up, so you can get some sense of the timing and the pacing of these individual videos that are being placed for Time Life. Um, so yes, I believe it. I sat in the gallery, and it took, I think, about 45 minutes for me to get through all of them, which I highly recommend doing. But it's made up of 7 different volumes, 7 separate videos that run gradually into each other, of these collections of images that Mungo pulled from time life issues. So I think we're ready to hand over to introduce Mungo and also head over to the slide to start talking about these one-on-one. Very good. Hi, Mungo.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. So this gets a sense of that scale. Like I said, it's a really great experience seeing the gallery turned into a theater like this. And this is the first volume, Foods of the World, which comes from the time life issues of Foods of the World, which involve recipes and different foods. Mungo, I'm interested in going back to just a little bit of context for you. I know you have a background in painting way back when of UCLA, but you're also preparator at the MoMA, and collecting and the classifications of collecting, I think, are very important to your work as you look at it over a broad spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, archives of all kinds have always kind of driven the work. I should clarify that the first 4 films that you'll see at Karma are culled from Time Life books. And then after that, it sort of expands to incorporate pretty much any kind of picture book, encyclopedia, how-to manual. The final film is a Pantone book shot in macro. And so they sort of run the gamut in terms, at this point, I sort of consider any book to be fair game. There's sort of a conceptual conceit at work, which is the idea that these books are being scanned for the internet by a high-speed robotic book scanner, and that is producing flipbook animations simply through its data collection. So it's sort of funny to see it sort of stutter online, because the project is so much about digitization and the conversion of analog material into data, and then to watch it sort of fail to be legible over the internet is sort of funny. Yeah, so that's sort of one of the frameworks that's operating. I've been making these for about 10 years. Yeah, I'm really happy with the installation. Karma really pulled out all the stops to do a really great, beautiful installation, and it really couldn't look better. So yeah, I encourage everyone to see it in person. I mean, that is part of what we're talking about too when we talk about the internet and data and the mediation of images and experiences and how we encounter everything through our phones now. And that is a consideration. This work is so much about the space between analog experience and digital experience that but it's art is sort of the last truly analog experience in a way. I mean, we're starting. I've always been asking, what is the thing like what streaming did to music? What is that thing in art? Because art remains this sort of stubbornly analog thing. And maybe it's NFTs. I don't know. Maybe it's VR. But I'm interested in these mediations.
Completely. I mean, one thing that comes to mind looking at this is the rhythm and the beat that you talk about stop motion animation and the speed of it, like 8 to 10 frames per second. After watching this for 45 minutes, like the experience that you have watching these things on a screen where you can walk away from it and you have a relationship to this small thing you can close is completely different than when you're in a room of this relentless pace, and also the sound. You feel it in your body. It's like especially the sound of Food of the World. It's like this. It's like the sound of like a fight scene, or it's like a duel. It's like two people walking around each other, ready to fight, and you're feeling that in your own heartbeat and internalizing it in your body. It's aggressive in some parts. I think the first video for me I found, and the flowers too, which we'll talk about, there's an aggressiveness to the body experience that you really can't get through watching it the way we're doing it right now, which is incredible. When did you begin collecting time life? I know you've dealt with time life as like a concept and a theme for a while now in your practice with the time life portraits, but when did you start collecting and going directly to the archive as a source?
Can I just talk about the music for 1 second?
Oh yeah, of course.
I should mention that so there's no robotic book scanners in the work. They're never pictured or filmed. They just are sort of a conceptual phantom that exists in my thinking about how I produce this work. And there's this book scanning robot at the University of Tokyo that I worked with them a little bit and shot a little footage there. I have a feeling it will eventually show up in a future volume, but the thing that's really amazing about these book scanning robots, which are employed by everybody from Google to Harvard University, the Getty has one, but it's it's different in that it's very much about preserving the document. It's very delicate, but it scans all their ancient volumes and illustrated manuscripts and things. The one at the University of Tokyo is really destructive, and they tear the spine off the book to scan it at high speed, and the book is transformed into data. It's destroyed and turned into data. And this was something that interested me, this like transformation. And at the same time, it's really loud. It has flipping pages, keyboards clattering, camera lenses clicking. So it becomes kind of like a free jazz percussion score. And that was what inspired both the frame rate of the films, which is it shoots at about 8 pages a second, and the soundtrack. So that's when I was it directed me towards, I tend to need some kind of external guidelines. Like in the past, when I've made films that were stop motion, 24 frames a second is the frame rate of film. So that's the speed of the animation. In this case, it was a lot more freeform. You asked me when I started, and I started about 10 years ago. And about as long as I've been making those time mirrors, I've been making these films. They didn't come into focus for a long time. They were sort of a set of experiments that maybe one day I would show, but they were very much throwing spaghetti at the wall. And I would leave them idle for 6 months while I did other things. And so, yeah, at a certain point, when I didn't have something else going on, I would work on them. But then Brendan came to the studio about 2 years ago and was like, this is what I want to show. So that was when it was like, okay, it's time for it to get real.
I know you've talked about how your schedule is fluid and not completely set, but about how much time when you would work on this project would you spend in a studio session or a day, like working on it?
Well, one of the reasons I called it Time Life, even though it's not totally reliant on Time Life books, is that it sort of steals your life away. And because stop motion is another way of thinking about, give life to something through time. You can shoot all day and get 10, 20 seconds, of material if it's a good day. So, and this was during COVID, a lot of this, so we weren't doing full days in the studio. So yeah, it takes a long time. I mean, there's a reason I've been doing these for like 10 years. I think I finally know how to make them. Like chapter 8 is gonna be a lot easier than the last 7. But yeah, when it finally became time to focus on this project, I think we started the cookbooks film in like 2014, and it was finished like 2 Saturdays ago. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it was a lot. It was a lot.
Incredible. Well, I love what you said. I want to go back to it because it's something that's a recurring theme is sensing that art is going through this time of slippage, where right now it's this hybrid thing between digital and analog, but it slowly we're also, you have this kind of sense that this is a moment in time that even 10-20 years from now it'll only be a digital experience, or potentially could just be a digital experience. And that moment of the physical book literally being destroyed to create the virtual experience is like a wonderful motif and metaphor for
The
that.
PDF, yeah, the birth of
Yeah.
the PDF, the death
It
of the
reminds
book.
me, it reminds me, which takes me into like a question too. There's a scene in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian where the judge, there's this weird little moment in the book where, and it essentializes who the judge is, where he's drawing a cup in his journal and then smashes and destroys the cup when he's done with the drawing, and it kind of becomes this like metaphor for him.
Huh.
And something that I was thinking of within your work is there's this really nice balance between this kind of like generous sublime you're creating with everything you're showing us, but also a little bit of a cruelty, or a little bit of a, or maybe like an awareness that this thing is like a tidal shift that we're not in control of, maybe. And I wonder if you have a position on that you'd like to talk about.
I mean, I think in a way what you're talking about is this pairing of anthropology, which can be cruel, and if you zoom out from the human experience, it can be quite cruel, and at the same time a kind of phenomenology that can be generous and experiential, and highly analog. Your presence is demanded. I think I'm interested in pairing those poles, if you will. I think I'm trying to bundle the entirety of human experience here in a way. I think, it's a tall order. But I've always been drawn to really encyclopedic, comprehensive things, and wanting to kind of capture as much as I can in a work. I also think, you mentioned my time as a preparator at MoMA. I think there's this maybe this is where I get this idea that there's something irreducibly analog in visual art. But the best part of that job was in the morning, the crew would gather and everyone had their shows that they were working on or whatever. But if, occasionally the head prep would hand you a feather duster and tell you to go up into the galleries, and you were alone before the museum opened, and you were dusting off, the bicycle wheel and the Van Goghs and stuff, and you were alone in the galleries with them. And to me, there's something about these artworks gathering dust that is analog in the extreme. You know what I mean? Like digital material doesn't have dust on it. So this is a sort of, I don't know, maybe a kind of primal scene for me.
Yeah. I mean, would you say that's like a formative moment of being interested in the maintenance of art objects and shifting away from the creation of art objects, although you still use them, to like the mechanisms of display, or the mechanisms of scanning these images, or taxonomy, or anthropology?
It's in the sort of spectrum of considerations. I'm always thinking in a sort of extrapolative way where, everything is a box inside another box. And if you just keep stepping out, eventually you're at the edge of the universe. But you can also go all the way into the grain, like in the case of the flower film. So it's sort of I think, again, it's a little bit of an anthropological read on objects and their uses, you know.
Completely.
Time Life books themselves were very formative because my dad had them on the shelf, and there's sort of a collecting and archiving that happens with those. I mean, you know, literally, Time Life Books was formed to take advantage of the massive photo archives of Time Magazine and Life Magazine. And then they were like, well, let's make a bunch of books and we'll hire all the experts in the field. If we're going to make a series about the cosmos, we'll get Carl Sagan to edit it, you know. But it was always like we'll get the experts. We'll create these networks. It's almost like this proto-internet. And you subscribed and they arrived in your home. It's like this analog internet. And I think in sort of 1970s, 80s, middle-class California, they signaled a kind of intellectual aspiration to know more, to understand more, and have a wider knowledge of the world than was previously possible at your fingertips. And of course, on the bookshelf in your home, the spines are all sort of color coordinated, and it's sort of like, oh, I have the full set. You know what I mean? So there's this collecting archiving impulse that maybe starts there. And then these, you know, and then I'm going and I own all of Time Life books and have them in a room in my studio where we shoot these films. And it's sort of a meta collection, you know, to make these films, to collect aspects of these books into short stories or experiences, I guess, phenomenological experiences about type or the book object, or about food, or about color, or about exercise, or Rodin.
How do you feel about the books? Are you careful with them still?
No, they've gone through as much hell as a book scanner would treat them with. No, they're not particularly precious, and they're not terribly expensive on eBay. I haven't looked lately, but yeah, they're out there.
Nick, can we go back a few slides? I just want to explain what we've looked at. Can we go, yes, slide 8. So this is the first volume, or the first segment, and if you're able to walk into the gallery, this is kind of the start if you have a chance. And like you said, it does this really interesting accordion effect of curation or content arrangement, whatever you want to call it. But it starts off with this wonderful string of copyrights that you're zoomed in on very closely, and then kind of zoom out away from, and then you realize it starts revealing into cookbooks and ingredients and everything. But there's also this like very kind of negative joy or critical joy that I keep sensing in the work, that's like interested in the bureaucracy of it, or the copyright, or the office space that comes up multiple times within the work.
I'm always interested in the sort of paratextual and metatextual elements of any experience. I'm such a hybrid of my influences. I went to art school at sort of the height of the pictures generation, and appropriation and all that sort of stuff is totally second nature to me. At the same time, I love phenomenal perceptual art, like light and space. But for me, that was always a little culture free. You know what I mean? It was a little bit trying to ape a religious experience or something. And but a lot of pictures art was not aware of the room, if you will. You know what I mean? I think that sort of exploded with someone like Felix Gonzalez Torres, who made sort of art that aped minimalism's phenomenology, but was very culturally inflected and politically inflected, and who I really admired. And so, yeah, for me, there's no image in a book without the image on the flip side of the page, or the copyright material at the bottom, or the caption. You know what I mean? It's all one experience for me. They always arrive together. So that's probably expressed and articulated in these films. That kind of, yeah, the bureaucracy of the archive itself, you know.
Yeah. Well, the dusting of the books, or the information, or the things that make it possible, or commercially viable, or make it something that can make enough money to make the shelf on the wall. And this one in the flower pieces, to me, also going back to, like, it kind of has this like Kossuth kind of thing, where it's like you see the recipes in terms of language, you see the recipes in terms of images of the raw materials, and then you see them assembled, and then you see the words associated with them. There's this like kind of multiple indexing of like cake is material, cake is words, cake is image, you know, cultural cake. Like it becomes, and same with the flowers. You have like here you have the like the seed packets, you have the indexing, then you have flowers that are just kind of shown as if they're in the wild, and then you have this zooming, which really becomes a focus in this work. Or it's the first time, I think, yeah, and when you're watching these all played together, that you're really also taking the kind of directorial lens and zooming us into these things until we're just seeing the registration of ink like this.
Yeah, and it gets even deeper in than that. We shot this with lenses, you know, this long. It's you know, things. It's 30 feet wide in the installation, but it's like a 1/4 inch of material. With this piece, I sort of set out to make a psychedelic experience. I wanted it to be a long journey, if you will. But my impulse to go into the 4-color halftone of the printing of the photographs was to show that they're constructed, to show that they're atomized in a certain sense, but also I was interested in this idea that the earliest human inks and dyes were made from crushed flower petals, so that they no longer are, of course, but the idea that images of flowers would be made from flowers was appealing, and sort of connected to, you know, back thousands of years. So that was part of that impulse. And then I was pairing this photography with this track by a Swedish drummer named Sven-Åke Johansson called Nabild. And I was working it for years. Like I said, a lot of these I'd work on them, and we'd try stuff and try songs, cut to the song for a while, and if it kept working, keep cutting to it. And sometimes we'd have to jettison a song because it just like took a left turn or just didn't continue to work. And I didn't want to butcher anybody's song and edit them. You know, I wanted sort of whole ideas in that sense. And anyway, at a certain point, I just decided to, what does Nabild mean anyway? It means close-up image. So I embedded it in the title of the work.
I love that. Did you find, I mean, with all this scanning, what was that process like? Did you find it meditative? Did you find it boring? Were there days where it's something you look forward to, or days where it was How is the process of scanning so many of these images?
Parts of it can be really fun. It can, you're really bringing something to life. Sometimes you shoot for a while, and then we use this stop motion software called Dragon Frame, and you shoot for a few hours and you hit play and you get to watch what you just did. You can also, and it was great, but there's definitely a real slog element to it. I mean, it's, the cookbooks film, I think, has 19 or 20,000 images. So it's, it can be a slog.
It's such a weird experience too, just talking about the work in this way, because something I kept thinking about watching it is you're able to do it in a lot of different bodies of your work, but specifically in these where there's like a literal information sublime, like you're taking in too much. And I had moments where I was like, this is going into like the subliminal part of my brain. Like it's bypassing what I notice and see now, and it's getting into something that would have to be like brought out by therapy in 5 years,
or
and
hypnosis.
like, yeah, exactly. And seeing these images now, it's so strange because it's like, I I trust you that I saw this, but I also have no literal memory of seeing this exact image. I just see the flood.
Right. Yeah, it's a beautiful still, and there's thousands of them in the film, and you almost get cheated because they're going by at, I think the flowers film at parts is 12 frames a second. So it's a lot of material. This may be my solution to trying to make perceptual art using cultural material. When I made my first stop motion film was a 16 millimeter film of my art dealer's Rolodex from 2009. And the thing that it was really fun to do and felt both old and new, using stop motion and, talk about analog. And there are parts where every card in the Rolodex gets a frame of film, and it's at 24 frames a second. And you see Christopher Williams' name or Donald Judd's name or whatever. And the next time you watch it, a different set of names stand out to you. So I was interested in how your brain and your eye interact with this high speed material. And that sort of opened the door to this whole series.
And going back to it, I feel like something, I could be wrong, but something that comes across in your work is like the amount of work that goes into something that looks like it doesn't have any work, like stop motion animation. It's all this work to just seem like natural movement or natural fluidity or like mimic real life.
Yeah.
And like, you're interested in these modes of display that are trying to act like there is no authority at all within it, like the amount of work that goes into, all I'm doing is showing you flowers,
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think about that too in a sort of unconscious way. If I had to say what that impulse is, it's like a desire to have some element of grace in the work, that it feel unhurried and unsullied and just simply arrived, like if you show too much effort, you can get caught up in that. I think that there needs to be a touchless quality. But saying that, I mean, this is the most manipulated thing I've ever done. Every shot is considered, every edit is considered. It's all cut to sound. It's a completely bananas amount of labor. So I'm glad you feel like this still has a continuity with the other work. Because it should, and it, hopefully it sort of informs a lot of that work in reverse, with, this set of concerns.
Completely. I mean, it's interesting too, hearing you talk about it, because like the flowers piece was like the most sensorially assaulting of all the pieces for me. Like it felt like I was watching explosions on the screen because there was just so much color so quickly, that it really felt like a cruel, or it felt like that cruelty of, like you said, which is seeing every flower but not being able to spend any time with it. You know, it's like you're getting to see like the God's eye view, but you're also realizing there's nothing truly individual about any of it. There's that really wonderful contrast that you feel dread and excitement to see it all at the same time.
I think maybe there's also a kind of contextual overload too, because these flower encyclopedias that I drew from are photographed by lots and lots of different photographers, printed in all kinds of different ways. They're from different eras, so there's sort of different printing technologies on display. There's kind of a huge dump of information, but this is another aspect of the work. I think of all these works as a sort of like with the Rolodex film, that was so much about the Rolodex no longer being a viable technology, right? Like everyone just has a phone now, and pairing it with a 16 millimeter film projector, these two wheels in conversation. But it was also a data dump. If Margot Levin, my old art dealer, if her Rolodex is gone, the film still has all the information, you know? So there's some of that here too. There's sort of a preservation of the archive that's being attempted, even if it's a kind of highly intuitive, abstracted notion of the archive. For the flowers, I mean, to me, the argument that film is making is that human visuality exists so we can look at flowers. There's sort of a, you know, there's flowers and sunsets. I need to make a sunset film. So that's, to some extent, why there's this extreme interrogation of the image.
Completely. Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, because when I look at these two, there's this, you talk about maintenance, preservation, but you also use the word abstraction, which I think comes across really clearly in this piece. It reminded me of the Sigmar Polk pieces of the drone footage, like watching a drone missile get closer and closer to a target. And the closer you get, the more abstract it is. It's a really wonderful visual motif of realizing that the people who are killed in a drone strike, it's based off of pixels and information, you know. And there's this legibility issue of the closer you zoom into the flower, the more disorienting and also the more it floods your system, and it becomes the most assaulting, as when you're just seeing these like colors flash at you in this extreme way.
I mean, it's also just image mediation, right? It's like the frames that these things arrive in, you know. This is you know, something, the inquiry of all my work is the frames through which we encounter the world that actually shape the experience as much as the thing on the other side of that portal, if you will. So
well, what you're describing is kind of vanitas to a degree, right? Like you experience all of this stuff and then you ultimately kind of get to this, you give up and you're like, I know all this information, but what do I do except look at a sunset?
And ultimately, I mean, vanitas in the sense of confronting mortality, is that what you mean? Because that's definitely an aim of a lot of the work. And the time mirrors are certainly that. It's absolutely what those are. So yeah, that is, I mean, I guess that's a way of talking about archives and preservation is what's left after we're gone. What are we leaving behind, both individually and culturally? And this is a kind of a pairing, I think. This project, almost more than a lot of my other work, maybe just because it's so full of micro decision, whereas a lot of the other projects have a smaller set of decisions, is about this pairing of individual intervention into sort of civilizational material. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, cultural material, masses of it, huge amounts of it, and then my particular edit of that material.
I think going to editing, maybe we could jump ahead to the questions volume. And this one for me, it really did the accordion micro macro thing very effectively. From what I could sense, and although sense really because the questions come so fast, is it kind of starts with a planetary scale, it shifts to like human and animals, and then it shifts to like biological medical questions. And then the only thing I distinctly remember is it goes from that to office space or like technology, which turns into office related questions, which I loved. And then it ended, I think the last question is, how does a cruise missile work? So it goes back to this kind of militarized universal scale.
Yeah, it starts with how big is an atom and it ends with how does a cruise missile fly? And it's a set of about 1,000 questions from a Time Life series called Understanding Science and Nature. And it runs through the cosmos to the animal kingdom to the body to technology, and it includes questions like how is material digitized and things like that. And it's paired with a field recording made by Lee Ronaldo of Hurricane Sandy outside his window. So you hear this roar and this sort of sprinkling of rain against the glass that to me sounded a little like a keyboard. And that's what made me want to pair it with this piece, this sort of like everything we know and don't know against this sort of coming catastrophe. What was your question again about it?
Oh no, I didn't have one. I just thought it was, this one really does the accordion of macro micro very well. And I went into viewing the work with as little information as possible because I just wanted to experience it. And I remember this piece, that thing you're describing of the hurricane, all I came away with was the strangeness of hearing the rush of something when you're inside of a room. Like you can sense, like it was like being inside of a cube that had an engine whirring, like this jet stream. I didn't know it was specifically a hurricane, but there is this weird distancing of like just like a drywall between you and like a tornado or an engine taking off. It was very weird and good.
That piece in particular, it's the shortest piece in the cycle. It's just over 2 minutes, and it's 1,000 questions at 8 frames a second, and they're hard to read. But nonetheless, you can read some of them. You know what I mean? Like you kind of get a sense of it, and you sort of get a sense of this body of knowledge.
And the rest of us will come out in therapy.
It's this classic sci-fi trope where the alien downloads human civilization, human history in like 20 seconds. You know, it's sort of a people have been mentioning that to me, and it was never as really a conscious trope, but it is. No, it wasn't something I was trying to cite, but it's an interesting reference because it's been used in science fiction going back decades. And there is a sci-fi aspect to the project. It is a little bit about technology and the future, you know, and what we do with the past in the future.
And I think I like a science fiction completely, like the you know, how looking at humanity and just finding it inconsequential. But I think for me it was that wavering back and forth between dread and then personal liberation, which is like, you know, if all these questions can come down to like 2 minutes, it's like it doesn't matter if I order this coffee or this, or if I eat too many calories today, you know, like it kind of it gets to this like wonderful, like, what do you do with all this except
All bets
for
are off.
exactly. Can we go ahead to Rodin, which was my personal favorite, the one
Mine
that I
too.
just like I can't stop thinking about, which is called Sideways Thought, and incorporates the copy bed grid, I think, the most out of any of the video pieces.
Yeah, yeah. They all have it. They all
Mhm.
have that black and white. They're all shot on the same copy stand, same software. There was a conscious choice to fold that into these films as a kind of technological grid background framework, but also as a kind of world building. So like in the cookbooks film, there are these moments where the music stops and then starts up again. And you may have noticed that there's like a little animation of the copy stand coming into focus or something.
Yeah.
That was
Yep.
because for a long time, those were black in between, you know, there was no music and we weren't cutting anything to silence. So, but I decided sort of fairly recently to put, I didn't want you to leave the world of the film in those pauses. So the copy stand bed became like a motif. And anyway, as far as this film goes, this is when I left Time Life Books behind. This there's a World of Art series by Time Life, and there is a book on Rodin, and I shot a bunch of material. Just to be clear, a lot of these films come out of experiments that we tried and shot stuff. And then it would be like, oh, that's kind of promising. You know, there'd be one element or that, you know, whatever. And the thing I liked best out of those tests was the Rodin sculptures feeling like they were physically present in a sense. And I was interested in this idea of doing a 3D scan of a sculpture with 2D material. So I just gathered all the Rodin books I could find online and 2 copies of each because I needed the front and back of every page. And I guillotined the spines off and started sorting them into sculptures. And then each of those sculptures got sorted into a 360-degree view around the sculpture. And then those got sorted into sort of types that would morph well into each other. And it was a huge paper edit before it was a film. And it was
it's such a beautiful effect.
Ton of work. And then I asked a friend, Ernst Carroll, to compose a score for it. So that was the other thing. This was the first one that had a original rather than found score. And I asked him to make it like an MRI you could dance to. And that's what he did. He did. It's really amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this one was the least assaulting. This one felt like kind of like a robot playing something beautiful, or it really allowed me to enjoy all of it. The grid really, this is the most science fiction for me, and it reminded me, right before lockdown happened, I got to see Rembrandt's Night Watch, and it was held in a glass cube, and there was this robot that was scanning every centimeter of it. Over the course of 2 years, trying to understand the pigment. Like, it was just moving imperceptibly slow, but seeing the night watch with this giant laser machine inside of a glass cube had this like thrilling thing of like multiple temporalities at the same time.
Right. It's collapsing the centuries. I mean, Rodin is the person I could do this with.
Exactly.
I can't really think of, he used photography in his work. He was born in 18, I think his public life began in like 1860.
Mm-hmm.
So he incorporated photography into his practice, and there's 150 years of photographs of the work. And you'll see in my film, there's people standing in front of the thinker in top hats, So there's enough material, and he's enough of I'm always interested in these figures who like Rodin and Van Gogh, who sort of exist in public space outside the art field, and so he was sort of the perfect target. As far as the sci-fi thing, I should mention, this part of the thinking when choosing subject matter for these films was, for lack of a better word, around robot intelligence and what a robotic book scanner that had any self-awareness would be interested in. And it would not be food. It would not be exercise. It would not be flowers. It would not be art. Do you know what I'm saying? It was very much these very, very human things being cycled through this technology. So, potentially dehumanizing technology. And then the challenge is, if it's dehumanizing, how do you make it still live? And so the approach to the flowers is a way to do that. And then making these sculptures revolve in a way that, I don't know, I haven't thought of the right way to say it, but it's almost like it breaks the fourth wall, or it sort of enters the room with you in a weird way. I don't know. It's new, so I'm still thinking it through.
Well, and I think that's this one felt the most like true to form, or there's like a real love and respect of Rodin. I felt like that came through in this for me. Like spinning the things in every way. Like I walked away from this section feeling like I understood Rodin in a different way. I was thinking about, like you said with photography, Rodin specifically, I think, thought of his work in a future sense, or was interested in how his work would be thought of much beyond his lifetime, and had the luxury of doing that. And then I was also thinking about how Haussmann played a role, that like Rodin is going back to the slippage between analog and digital, or this like kind of artist that existed, or thinking of art as between two times, transitioning closer to one. Rodin is like kind of sitting within modernism in that way. Like he was like 5 or 6 and got to see medieval Paris, but then grew up largely in a modernized Paris, and is trying to hold on to this form of sculpture that was like embracing expressionism and what was going on in painting, but also wanted to still make figurative sculpture cast in bronze.
And his biggest influence was Michelangelo, but he was using very contemporary technology to make tons and tons of copies of all the work at different scales.
Absolutely.
And he entered into a kitsch space as well. And to me, that's super interesting and productive, and is an outcome for certain kinds of popular art, So yeah, he's a super interesting figure.
Yeah, I remember the scene, if I remember correctly, it kind of starts off with rotations of, it just made me think of the Belvedere torso and how much that was an influence in the beginning of these like spinning limbs and torsos that turn into larger figural scenes.
This one is such an aggregate. You see that image of Rodin, the thinker being suspended from a crane. There's also images of the work debuting in public. There's images of the work from 2021. you know, and that sort of the endurance of the work through these different generations is collected in one place. And the photography is the glue, but you have all these, some of the photographs have his pencil marks on them because he was using the photography in the studio. So there's sort of a huge aggregation of contextual material, again, around these singular things.
I remember I heard a lecture once of Amanda Ross Ho, and she was talking about how she made every one of her sculptures through a viewfinder. Like she set up a camera and a tripod and looked through the viewfinder to see how it would turn into an image. I didn't know Rodin similarly was looking at images to inform how the sculptures came.
Yeah, he would photograph the work and edit with a pencil and like step back from it, which is sort of seems to suggest that he was thinking about documentation in the future, which is really, you know, interesting. Speaking of preservation.
Is that why you chose him, or is that the initial thing?
No, it was a pretty formal decision. It's really that he is one of the few people that there's this much material around, you know, that I could gather that many views of the work. Because that was the trick, is to find a 360-degree view of as many of his sculptures as I could. I still couldn't find them for many, but and then you have, what's funny in that film is that some of the works go by in 3 or 4 or 5 frames, and then something like The Thinker or The Kiss takes a really long time to turn around because there's so many photos exist of these very well-known sculptures. So it's almost like that the attention they've received is expressed in longer screen time.
This is my favorite volume. It was really incredible. You all have to make it out to see this one in person. Well, all of them, but love this one. Can we move on to the next? I think we have 2 more volumes. Is that right?
Yeah. This one.
There's a series of knots, which for me, this one and the animal locomotion, which we kind of went through quickly, has maybe the relationship most to stop motion animation. That like just the sequencing, it really animates itself in this way that I'm sure I wondered how the Time Life people would feel about that. I feel like the photographers would have a real sense of accomplishment seeing that you were able to animate them this way.
The animal locomotion was very deliberately a sort of reverse Muybridge treatment, and hence the title. And this one was much more, this one doesn't incorporate any Time Life material at all. It's just from, my son had a knot book, and it was like a how-to, and it was quite detailed. It's actually the one on the bottom right. I stole it from him and made a film. And but this one was very much about those fingers tying those ropes being surrogates for my own hands making these animations. Do you know what I mean? This one was the most self-referential about process and about, this is what I'm doing with this material. You know what I mean? So in a way, this one's a very swift sort of process gesture. Although it took forever. And we shot it many different ways before we sort of found what it was.
It came across as like a key to understanding the rest of the work in some ways. It goes with everything, but it seemed like it also stood outside and involved you, like you said. Like it was, the knot became this really rich metaphor.
I weirdly think of it as like a zine, like a zine put out by a knot enthusiast, because it's a bunch of different books collect. We shot a lot more than what's there, but eventually sort of was able to collect this specific eight or so books into this one anthology. It's like there's like one book and then another book, then another book, then another book, and how they change and where they change is determined by this very meditative score by Pauline Oliveros, single stroke roll meditation, and it's just a single drummer on a snare drum playing like essentially a drum roll, and with some sporadic intensities and lapses. But I was trying to make a kind of animation about making an animation, and that seemed, and in that sense it was a meditation, and that was the right score to do that with. And the working end, the title is, the working end is the end of the rope that you're running through everything, but it's also another, it's a name for the blade of a tool, the cutting edge of a technology. So I wanted to incorporate that notion into this too, into the sense of a book scanning robot, or the tools that are going to facilitate reading when there's no more books. When you don't print a book anymore, you publish it right onto the web,
Incredible. And also, I mean, just this also felt like I had the most direct relationship to drawing, just because it is like colored line.
Yeah, lines, yeah, for sure.
And then we have one more piece, which is the Pantone color sets, which felt like a palette cleanser after seeing everything else. Like it really did feel like it was a trance, or it felt like it was getting more towards like a hypnotic subconscious, and wasn't, I don't know, it felt more weirdly phenomenologically manipulative than everything else, just seeing color.
It's the light and space piece in the group.
Yeah.
It really deliberate. So it's a Pantone book, and it's shot with a macro lens. So that 30-foot wide image in the gallery is actually about an inch wide in life. And that's why you have that craquelure sort of fleshy quality to the image, where it actually ends up looking a lot like structuralist film, or an early Richard Serra video or something. But it's, yeah, you can see that sort of grain. That's just the texture of the ink on the coated paper at that, at that scale. This one I wanted, at a certain point, I realized if I had opened the project to any book at all, then a Pantone book was a book. And if you just shot a Pantone book front to back in order, what would happen? And this is what happened. It was actually quite straightforward. It took a few tries, but it was pretty straightforward. And then this one also has an original score by a guy named Adrian Garcia, who I've worked with a few times on things. And I asked him, it was the last film in the cycle, and I sort of wanted a sort of intense coda to the project that would push you out the door, and I kind of wanted it to make you cry. So I asked him, can you make a Pantone book make someone cry? And he obliged with a really intense score that sort of, it's done with analog synthesizers. There's a lot of that in the project, actually, in all the films. And it pulses with, so each page of a Pantone book is like 7 color swatches from dark to light of the same, there's sort of a pure color in the center and a darker and a lighter on a single page, and it cycles like boom, 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 and he made it pulse. He made a soundtrack that pulsed in time with that, with that sequence, and but yeah, it was very much like meant to evoke, Terrell and people like that, but and to color the room, we didn't paint the room. We left the room white. And I wanted, especially with this piece, for the whole room to change with each color on screen.
I have one last question, or one more thing to bring up, because I love hearing you talk about in relationship to the work, and then I want to hand it over to everyone else, which is Heidegger's distance of the near, which I think is across a lot of your work, but I feel like it came across very, very much directly in Time Life.
How do I feel about that idea relative to
No,
this
how do you
project?
feel about it? Yeah. Just I want, for those who don't know, you talk so eloquently about it, and also I feel like it's helpful to understanding the work.
Yeah, that idea is a really compelling one for me, because I feel like it lines up with my own sort of perceptual understanding of the world. It's this idea that you don't see the frames, you learn to forget the frames through which you see everything. And that includes language, it includes everything. But I think the example I always liked was that you can't see the glasses on your face, but you can't see without them, you know? So we learn to not see the codes and frames through which we understand the world. And for me, I can, one of the things I'm always sort of working through with my art is the fact that I can never forget those things. They all sort of, like I was saying earlier, they all arrive together. The image, the caption, the page number, the bibliography, the copyright symbol, they all kind of arrive together in a one big perceptual mashup. So, but he also says that technology makes the near distant and the distant near. And there's definitely some of that here too.
I think it's a really generous gift that you've given all of us with this show, and it's 10 years worth of work. I remember leaving the gallery stunned, and I think that's, and I appreciate where you left the work with the Pantone colors. It made me think that I used to have a thought that if we could all see the bend of the earth every day, or like the deepest parts of the ocean, we'd be nicer to each other, or kinder to each other. That like the sublime would do that. And what I realize now is that the sublime can also be nihilism. It can also be, you know, savage fascism can be seen in if you see everything as inconsequential. But I was really happy to see it end on the Pantones, because I did find it incredibly beautiful. And I walked outside and appreciated the rain a little bit more, and also decided to buy a donut, which I haven't eaten a donut in a long time, because I said, it's all
fuck it.
I should enjoy a donut. And so with that being said, I want to hand it over to all the questions we have. And thank you
so much, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you for this incredible.
That was really kind what you said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation. I would add that, yes, we encourage everyone to go to Karma and to see the show. I just put the link in the chat. It is on view through April 16th. And we have a handful of questions from the audience. I am first going to pass the mic over to our friend G.E. Schwartz. G.E., you should be able to turn the mic.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Mungo. I was thinking about this in terms of, an older school thing of Marshall McLuhan wrote that you cannot lose, you cannot win. The present includes the past and the future. And as you document the passage of these documents into their digital afterlife, are you affirming what McLuhan was saying here in any way?
Affirming the idea that these things are all bundled together, the past and the future, and technology and real life. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I guess the way that I would answer that is there's an aspect to being alive in culture, in civilization, using technology, aging, having a body that is a blur. And I think this work is a little bit about trying to approximate the blur of being alive. I happen to be doing it in this case using books, or at least printed matter, and grappling with what books mean right now as they're increasingly part of an analog world that we're leaving behind. But with other works, I have a different set of concerns. But I would say that kind of the phantasmagoria of the world coming at you is the subject of the work.
I totally get that. I thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, GE. Next, I'm going to pass I'm going to pass the mic now over to Claire Hungerford. Claire, you should be able to turn your microphone on now.
Oh gosh, I just wrote in the chat, I can't actually, where is it? Could you describe your relationship with copyright and fair use law? And I'm also steering you towards like a more optimistic generative aspects, which I assume you would be talking about, but just not like not in a restrictive sense, but in a kind of productive sense.
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, I have always appropriated. I always was drawn to material that has some consensus in public life, if you will, like I started out, when I went to art school, I tried to paint because I understood that's what you're supposed to do. But I've never been, to this day, very interested in the personal struggles of the artist, if you will, the biography, the narrative. I'm always more interested in what the work does, what the experience of the work is like. And if I want to identify with another person, I have film and literature for that. So it's just sort of, I mean, not to sound like a jerk, but I don't have a ton of patience for work that totally leans on biography. And so that was why it was frustrating to try to paint, because I felt like it was so much about me. And I'm much more interested in cultivating an experience for the viewer. And is a long way of answering that. Appropriation and conceptual art, when I began to discover those things, made so much more sense to my sensibility, that I discovered John Baldessari, when I was in college, and then through him, his students, the pictures generation, and that work was really a way out of that. Now, of course, if we're talking about Richard Prince or something, there's just wholesale theft going on. And I admire the brazen, just it's mine attitude to relative to culture. I think my attitude is probably a little more collaborative. I don't know if that's the right word, but all the work has always flirted with, if you want to work with things that are in public space that have a kind of legibility in public space, like my snowmen are these Amazon boxes, there is an element of infringement. And I have a lawyer for that. Does that answer your question at all? Claire?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Claire, for your question. Next, I'm going to pass the mic to our friend, Lynn Crawford. Lynn?
Thank you so much.
There you go.
I felt like this was a master class in detective work. And you know, there was that old Edgar Allan Poe quote, clues in plain sight, but these aren't clues in plain sight. These are clues that you very strategically and technically navigate us to, which led me to think about the London-based group Forensic Architecture, because that's exactly what they do. And I'm curious if you have any, if you think about, your process is similar, but if you're familiar with that group and
I've heard of them, but no, I don't know the work.
I think you'd appreciate it. They actually have busted criminals and war crimes, and I mean they have a whole different quote unquote motivation, but their process is very similar to yours, which is you cannot see this evidence, you cannot see what you were talking about without your manipulations, right? And at first, talking about that book being destroyed, I was like, oh no, but that book wasn't able to access the kinds of information you were going after, you know, technically. So anyway, I think that would be a group that that you would be interested in, and I'm sure they would be interested in your work also.
Thank you. I will look at them. That's cool.
Thank you so much for that, Lynn.
And both of you for this great, yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, here at the Rail, our tradition is to end our Q&A with passing the mic over to the Rail's own Fong H. Bowie. So Fong, the mic is yours.
It's not tradition, Nikki.
Semi-tradition.
Sometimes I'm not able to join, which is super sad. Thank you so much. Congratulations, Mungo.
Thank you.
Terrific, thoughtful conversation. And yeah, hearing you here and there talking, I'm sorry I was not there the entire time, but I need to go back and re-listen to it. But you mentioned, of course, Richard Serra, some of his early film, Essential. It's so interesting because he also trained as a painter, as you have. You know, we always took.
So many of us did.
I know, it's just ridiculous, you know, and then it just only to understand the pretext was all along was the wrong alchemy, but that's all right. But you mentioned Richard, I can't help it because, you know, Richard met Michael Snow when he returned from Europe, and it was a huge important in meeting Michael, because it was Michael who really introduced Richard to the whole avant-garde cinema scene in downtown, including Jonas Makers and everyone else, Brackage and the rest of them. And it's so interesting to look at Frampton, because he's another great filmmaker that we should have no longer in so much in our mind recently, but his name came up in the last several social environments. So I'm wondering two questions. One is that whether Hollis, particularly his great film Beyond Lima, we have screened it many times at Anthology Film Archives, and I wonder.
Can you say the name of the film one more time?
Beyond Lima, Z-O-R-N-S. Lema is L-E-M-M.
Oh yeah.
Great film. It's really one of the great structuralist film. And the other question is Christian McClay, The Clock. References just pop to mind so urgently as hearing you talking about your own work, you know?
A couple things about Hollis Frampton. I know his work mostly through my wife, Carrie Tribe, who makes film and video installation, and has done a really amazing performance and film based on his film Critical Mass that everyone should check out. It's kind of an unbelievable thing, unbelievable take on somebody else's work. Second, I should mention, I never mentioned this in the whole talk, but there was a moment when I was making these films that I thought it was going to be one massive feature.
Yeah.
Like an hour and a half, 2-hour film. And at a certain point, I started to lose my mind because it was too many things to hold in my head.
Yeah.
And the Hollis Frampton Hapax Legem, I can't remember the title, it's in Latin, but it's a 12 or 13 film cycle.
Yes.
And they're connected and not connected. And that, I felt, between that and the fact that Time Life books themselves were broken into volumes, allowed me to start thinking about, this could just be in chapters. This does not have to be one massive thing. It can happen over time, and it can be on different subjects. And that was part of what I felt gave me permission to do that, was Frampton and Time Life books themselves. As far as the clock, what I would say about that is it's an important reference for me. Things like the clock and Fuchsy and Weiss's The Way Things Go, and art films that did not shy away from popular space. Those are inspiring to me. I think it's really critical, making the kind of art that I do, to imagine a public beyond the art world. And those projects do that. And so that's an important marker for me.
Super interesting. Thank you so much, Mungo. It's great. Yeah, the Hapax Legamona. That's the film.
Yeah, there you go.
Hapax Legamona. 71, 72, I think. Beautiful film. Cool. Well, just the last thing I just share with you. It's also interesting to know that Hollis, while he was at Andover, in that wooden school that he was in the same class with Carl Andre and Frank Stella, as a teenager, he was the first to have paid a visit, could you believe it, to Ezra Pound when Pound was sent to St. Elizabeth for treason. He was the first one who came and visited him and recorded him, visited him every week.
Wow.
Andover took, the time to work on a little bit encouragement on when Pound was working on the cantos, could you believe it? For Roaches, 14 years old kid, 15 years old. Amazing. But anyway, grazie mille, Mungo. Can't wait to see the show.
Thank you. I hope you do.
Yeah, we will. Thank you. Back to you, Nikki. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Fong. Well, we do have a regular tradition here, and that is to end every single event with a poetry reading. And so today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate, Joshua Mehigan, to the stage. Joshua Mehigan's second poetry collection, Accepting the Disaster, from FSG 2014, was cited in the TLS, the New York Times Book Review, and elsewhere as a best book of 2015. He was an Alan Collins Fellow at the 2015 Breadloaf Writers Conference and has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation. Mehigan's poems have appeared in many periodicals, including The New Yorker, The New Republic, and Poetry, which awarded him its 2013 Levinson Prize. So without further ado, over to you, Joshua.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the Brooklyn Rail, and thanks to Mungo and Andrew for a great conversation, and thanks to I'm going to read in the last 5 minutes, because of things that were being discussed. I decided to change my reading, but don't worry, it's not going to go on. It's the same length of time. I'm going to read one poem. The poem is called Demo Mode, and it is new. I have not read it before. in front of people. If you know, does anybody here know the video game Galaga? Nobody knows. It's an old game. It's an old game. It's, you know, like
have played it.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I spent years playing it continually, and so that plays that's just a reference in this. Okay, so Galaga is it's just basically like a complicated Space Invaders where you're shooting at the, you know, you're shooting at aliens, and it's very kind of low tech compared to a lot of stuff that's around now. But it's, you know, it's sort of in the poem, it's you know, the poem is it has an epigraph, and it's falling asleep after a long bad drive, 5 a.m. So this is a hypnagogic experience. It's all sort of on the edge of being awake and being asleep after driving. I don't know if you've ever had this kind of experience. I forget the name for this. This is a kind of a Greek name, where you just, if you look at fireworks and you close your eyes, you see fireworks. Same thing with driving. Maybe some of you have noticed. Okay, so demo mode, and demo mode is the mode that where when you're finished playing a video game in an arcade in 1986, there's a you know, it goes into demo mode, which is where it shows you, it just plays the game itself to show you how to use it. Okay. Demo mode. Falling asleep after a long bad drive, 5 a.m. Like coming to already on the run in darkness, with the small lights soundlessly ordering and reordering themselves outside, alone like that at night, not seeing the panel of impartial instruments or their consolatory glow, aware only of the repeated scenery always appearing up ahead, arising from nothing, and so easily disappearing into the edges of the visual field. This suffering at the wheel composed the will until you only understood one thing: you must keep going. Yes, you must get home. He drove, or anyway, the car went. How, he couldn't say. It just did. It was like a dark ride at the carnival, but fast. Then, traveling through the dark, he got a feeling. It was as if the car were somehow changed, better, as if the car had understood. It was exciting. It was dangerous. This wasn't hard. But it was just like life. That whole way forward, opening forever, the white dash flashing, orange road reflectors in strange, evocative configurations, the red lights gone ahead or falling back, afloat on darkness, curve, incline, another, suspiciously alike, and everywhere nighttime. And don't forget, the body too, inert, and never once so credibly a thing as now, dead weight forever, trying in spite of turns and slopes to keep on going the same direction. It was all one thing, mechanical, monadic, just like life, as if the whole way forward ran along a chain conveyor, the chains well camouflaged below a moving surface, maybe road. It was too dark to tell. And then you knew. You felt in the grotesques of orange dots monotonously reconfiguring the vista's seeming rise and fall and rise through a mysterious course of slopes and turns and the associated queasy burden of gravity. And you supposed it meant progress, as if you really had been going from here to there. Sure, sure. But now he knew. It was a gaffed wheel. Here, there. What there? There wasn't any there. And what might feel like movement, brother, that was something else. That was activity, like seeing or being, like drifting. It was just like life. It went. In the next moment, with a violent start, he might descry some sudden threat the instant whatever it was right in front of him, and then too late, it was the end, except somehow it all kept going just the same. It passed. Same cheap looped scenery, no depth, as in the moments after you were killed but hadn't yet absorbed the fact or quit your prize spot at the Golden Age arcade game, when, independent of your will, the system, since you had not achieved galactic hero, would enter demo mode. And on the screen, the field of stars kept running in a loop, stars looped, and not a sound, all sense of time and space collapsing. That was Galaga. That was like this was like that. But when, as always in that game, the stars had run on into demo mode, results, then score, adduced in silence, rival craft in silence throbbing above your craft, no longer yours. Still shocking and routine, the model sorties fell with a sound of falling, tractor beam and fighter captured, then the copyright. In those low moments, he had stood no quarter and stared as, through the idle interval, a part of him, the quickest part, went on in stealth, maneuvering. He drove, or anyway, the car went. How seemed almost immaterial. It just did. The mind, too, when you came to think of it, was such a craft. Loved, obsolete machine, no player, never. Golden Age arcade game in demo mode. The mind kept going. Like the dark rides at a carnival, but fast, kept going. It was so confusing. Oh, he'd always known. He knew it at 15 and at 12, when he had stood a few feet back, both hands hung buzzing by his sides. No player, still primed as always to respond. The old extraterrestrial imperative. He felt it now within, and he kept going, following with his mind and with his caring, because he also understood he must infer position and velocity from curves and from dead weight, from silver orange points, from the points and points, point after point after point, more from points of silver orange, and sometimes up ahead, red light, red eyes that rose and sank through night like Vantablack. And so he also understood he must obey that system, which was memoryless. No stars, no sorties, and no tractor beam. And though it wouldn't change a goddamn thing, he must keep going. That was the whole point. It really didn't matter what he wanted. And the stark facts grew starker all the time. There was no respite, no letting go, not of the hard involuntary effort, like trying to control a bowling ball after you let it go by leaning hard away from the inexorable gutter. Not of his height, not of his hands' malefic grip on the wheel gone too, the hands, the body gone, only the mind itself traveling too fast out in the open. Still, he must get somewhere, where he wasn't sure. It wasn't even possible to stop, not till he reached the end, not till he moved from the place he himself was in already to the one he had been in all along. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joshua. What an honor to be the first audience to hear this read from you. So thank you so much. We
thank you very much.
Are very
thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, I want to thank you, Joshua. I want to, of course, thank you, Mungo and Andrew, for your conversation today. We'd also like to thank Brendan, Alexis, Emily, and the extended team at Karma for helping to make today's event possible. We encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we will upload today's conversation shortly. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for a tribute to Sylvain Lotringier, featuring Charles Gaines, Paul McCarthy, Nora Waddell, and led by Grail Consulting editor Donation Grow. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Eileen Miles. You can now all turn on your microphones to say hello and goodbye, and have a lovely Monday, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mungo.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your reading, Joshua.
Hi. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Joshua.
So good.
Thank you for the reading, Joshua. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for great conversation, Mungo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fong.
So great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Go
you.
see the show. Please go to see the show, you all.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
And congratulations, you all. Thank you. Thank you, you guys. Let's get
Stay
some
safe.
fun.
Yay.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Ciao, everyone.
Hi, G. Ciao,
Hey,
Mosse.
man.
Okay. Ciao.